Lynn had never seen so many diamonds in one room before. They sparkled from the necks and wrists of women who walked like they owned the world, which she supposed they probably did. The grand lobby of Parker Hall gleamed with polished marble and crystal chandeliers that made her feel small and out of place. She clutched her worn leather music folder closer to her chest. It contained the sheet music she'd practiced for thousands of hours, the pages dog-eared and marked with pencil notes in her messy handwriting. Lynn glanced down at her outfit, a simple dark blue dress she'd found on sale last year, paired with the only decent shoes she owned. She'd spent an hour that morning polishing those shoes until she could almost see her reflection in them. "Excuse me?" a woman with perfect hair said, barely glancing at Lynn as she moved past, the scent of expensive perfume lingering in her wake. Lynn checked the time on the large clock mounted on the wall. 20 minutes until she would perform. Her stomach twisted into knots as she made her way toward the backstage area, following the signs for contestants. A security guard stopped her at the entrance. "Contestant pass?" "Yes, here." Lynn fumbled with her folder, pulling out the lanyard she'd received in the mail weeks ago. The guard examined it carefully as if he couldn't quite believe she belonged there. "Go ahead," he finally said, stepping aside. The backstage area hummed with nervous energy. Other pianists warmed up their fingers with silent exercises, some closing their eyes in concentration, others whispering with their teachers or family members. Lynn recognized several faces from music magazines and competition circuits, the cream of the crop from prestigious conservatories around the world. No one spoke to her as she found a quiet corner to prepare. She wasn't surprised. Lin Chen was a nobody in this world, a girl who grew up in a small apartment above her parents' restaurant, who learned piano first on a cheap keyboard, then on the old upright piano at her community center, a girl who practiced whenever she could steal a moment between helping at the restaurant and her studies. A woman with a clipboard approached. "Lin Chen? You're 19th in the lineup. Please be ready in 15 minutes. Lin nodded, her mouth too dry to speak. As the woman walked away, Lin heard her mutter to another organizer. "This should be interesting. She's the wild card entry from the online qualifiers." Lin pretended not to hear, focusing instead on her breathing exercises. She hadn't expected to make it this far. The Harrington International Piano Competition was one of the most prestigious in the world. When she'd submitted her video application on a whim, recorded on her community center's piano with her friend's smartphone, she'd never imagined she would actually be selected. One of the competition volunteers approached, a kind-looking older man with glasses. "Can I get you some water?" he asked. "Yes, please," Lin said gratefully. When he returned with a small bottle, he smiled encouragingly. "First time at Harrington? Is it that obvious?" Lin asked, a little, he admitted. "But everyone starts somewhere. I've been volunteering here for 20 years. Seen all types come through. Some of the best weren't the ones you'd expect." His kindness calmed her slightly, but as the minutes ticked by, Lin's anxiety returned full force. Through the monitor in the waiting area, she could see the current performer, a young man in a tailored suit who played with technical perfection. The audience applauded enthusiastically when he finished. 3 more pianists performed, each one flawless and polished. Lin's hands began to tremble. What was she doing here? She didn't belong on the same stage as these people. They had been training their whole lives for this, with the best teachers, the best instruments, the best opportunities. "Lin Chen, you're up next," the stage manager said, interrupting her spiral of doubt. Lin stood on shaky legs and followed him to the wings of the stage. From here, she could see the packed auditorium, the judges' table front and center, the massive grand piano gleaming under the spotlights. The current performer, a woman in a red gown, finished to enthusiastic applause. As she exited, she gave Lin a once-over and raised an eyebrow slightly before moving past. And now, performing Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor, "Please welcome Lin Chen," the announcer's voice boomed. Lin stepped onto the stage, the bright lights momentarily blinding her. The polite applause felt distant, as if coming from underwater. She made her way to the piano, conscious of every step, feeling hundreds of eyes watching her. She bowed slightly, then sat at the bench, adjusting it to the right height. The glossy black Steinway was worth more than her entire life savings. She'd never played on an instrument this fine before. As Lin positioned her hands above the keys, she heard it, the murmurs. They rippled through the audience like a gentle wave, growing louder as people noticed her posture, her hand position, everything that screamed self-taught to the trained eyes in the room. Someone chuckled. Another person whispered too loudly, "Who let her in?" Lynn's cheeks burned. She glanced toward the judge's table and immediately wished she hadn't. A gray-haired man with glasses was frowning deeply. A younger woman was whispering to her colleague, both wearing expressions of concern. The third judge, a famous pianist Lynn had watched in YouTube videos for years, simply looked bored, as if he'd already decided her performance wasn't worth his attention. Lynn froze, her hands hovering above the keys. The murmurs grew louder. Someone coughed pointedly. In that moment, she thought about her mother, who had worked double shifts at the restaurant to buy Lynn her first keyboard, who had never complained when Lynn practiced the same piece over and over until midnight. Her father, who knew nothing about classical music but who had once told a customer, "My daughter plays the piano like her heart is speaking." Lynn took a deep breath. She placed her fingers on the cool ivory keys. The first notes were shaky. She hit a wrong note in the opening measure and heard a distinct scoff from somewhere in the front rows. Lynn's face burned hotter, but she kept going. Chopin's ballade was a piece that told a story of yearning, of struggle, of beauty found in unexpected places. As Lynn played past the first page, she began to forget where she was. The audience faded, the judges disappeared. Even the magnificent piano became just an extension of herself. In her mind, Lynn wasn't at Parker Hall anymore. She was back at the community center, playing on the old upright with the sticky E-flat key, playing not for competition or approval, but because the music lived inside her and needed to come out. She remembered the countless hours spent watching instructional videos online, the way she'd taught herself to read music, the notebooks filled with techniques she'd developed through trial and error. No, her method wasn't traditional. No, she didn't have the pedigree of her competitors. But the music spoke through her in a way that was uniquely her own. As Lynn moved into the middle section of the piece, her confidence grew. Her fingers danced across the keys with increasing assurance, finding the rich emotional core of Chopin's composition. She let her body sway slightly with the rhythm, no longer concerned with how she looked or what anyone thought of her posture. A drop of sweat ran down her temple. Lynn didn't notice. She was completely immersed in the music now, riding its waves of intensity. When she reached the powerful octave passage, she attacked it with all the passion she'd kept contained during her years of practicing in secret. During late nights when the world was asleep, someone in the audience gasped. Lynn didn't hear it. The world outside her connection to the music had disappeared completely. Time seemed to stretch and compress all at once. Lynn approached the final climactic section of the piece, her hands moving with a speed and intensity that surprised even her. This wasn't just about playing the right notes anymore. This was about telling her story, about proving that music belonged to everyone, not just those born into the right circumstances. The final notes hung in the air, resonating through the perfect acoustics of the hall. For a moment, Lynn sat still, eyes closed, letting the last vibrations of sound wash over her. Then, slowly, she became aware of the silence in the room. It wasn't the silence of disinterest or dismissal. It was the silence that comes before something important happens. Lynn opened her eyes and looked up. The man who had scoffed was staring at her, his mouth slightly open. The whispering women were still. The judge, who had been bored, now leaned forward in his seat, a peculiar intensity in his eyes. A single person began to clap, then another, and suddenly the hall filled with applause. Hesitant at first, then growing in confidence, Lynn stood on shaky legs and bowed. As she turned to leave the stage, she caught sight of the volunteer who had brought her water. He was smiling broadly, giving her a thumbs up from the wings. She didn't know if she'd win. She probably wouldn't. But as Lynn walked off the stage, she knew something had shifted, not just in how they saw her, but in how she saw herself. Sometimes, the most important audience to win over was your own. Lynn sat in the contestants' waiting area, her hands still trembling. Had that really happened? She replayed the moment in her mind, the initial scoffs, the wrong notes, the gradual shift in the audience. The applause had felt so unexpected, so unreal. Water? The same kind volunteer approached with another bottle. "Thank you," Lynn said, her throat dry from nerves. "That was something special out there," he said, his eyes crinkling at the corners. His name tag read Henry. Been volunteering at this competition for years. Never seen the room change like that during a performance? Lynn looked down at her hands. I made mistakes. Henry shrugged. So did Glenn Gould, and they still talk about him 50 years later. Before Lynn could respond, the backstage door opened, and a woman in an elegant pantsuit strode in. Lynn recognized her immediately. Vivian Park, the competition director. Ms. Park moved with purpose through the waiting area, stopping to speak briefly with a few contestants. To Lynn's surprise, she headed straight toward her. "Ms. Chen?" Vivian Park extended her hand. "A word, please?" Lynn followed her to a quiet corner, heart pounding. Was she in trouble? Had she broken some competition rule? "Your application was unusual," Ms. Park began, consulting her tablet. "No formal training beyond high school band. No prestigious teachers. No conservatory." She looked up, studying Lynn's face. "The video quality was poor, but something about your playing caught our attention. A raw talent. That's why you received our wildcard entry." Lynn nodded, unsure what to say. "After today's performance, I'm both confused and intrigued," Ms. Park continued. "Your technique is," she searched for the right word, "unconventional. You hit wrong notes. Your posture would make any piano teacher wince." Lynn felt her cheeks flush with embarrassment. "And yet," Ms. Park's voice softened slightly, "something happened in that hall that rarely happens here. People stopped analyzing and started feeling." She tapped her tablet screen. "The judges' preliminary scores are interesting. Technical marks are low, as expected. But interpretation marks?" She turned the tablet so Lynn could see. "Some of the highest of the day." Lynn stared at the numbers, not quite believing what she was seeing. "You'll perform again tomorrow in the second round," Ms. Park said, taking back her tablet. "The competition gets fiercer, just—" She hesitated. "Be prepared." With that cryptic warning, she walked away, leaving Lynn with a mixture of hope and dread. Lynn checked the time. 2 hours until the day's performances ended, and the first round results would be announced. She needed air. Slipping out a side door, she found herself in a small garden behind the hall. The late afternoon sun filtered through oak trees, casting dappled shadows on the path. Lynn sat on a bench, finally allowing herself to breathe deeply. A light breeze carried the scent of nearby flowers, so different from the heavy perfumes that had surrounded her inside. There she is, the girl who doesn't know how to sit at a piano. Lynn looked up. 3 contestants stood on the path, led by a tall woman with perfect posture and a cold smile. Lynn recognized her as Zoe Winters, winner of last year's Moscow competition. "I'm sorry," Lynn said, though she had heard perfectly well. "Your hands," Zoe said, demonstrating with her own perfectly manicured fingers. "Basic technique. First thing they teach in piano lessons." Her companions smirked. "But you wouldn't know about lessons, would you?" Lynn felt her stomach knot. "I had some lessons. Just not many." "Clearly," said one of the others, a man with slicked back hair. "It's insulting, really. Some of us have dedicated our entire lives to perfecting our craft. Practiced 8 hours a day since we were children. And then someone walks in playing like that." "The audience seemed to like it," Lynn said quietly. Zoe laughed, but there was no humor in it. "The audience doesn't know any better. They're easily impressed by dramatics. The judges won't be so forgiving in the second round." They walked away, their laughter drifting back to Lynn. She sat frozen, their words echoing in her mind. They were right. What was she doing here? This competition was for real pianists, not restaurant girls who taught themselves on community center pianos. Lynn pulled out her phone and stared at it, thumb hovering over her mom's number. She could call, say she was coming home. Save herself the embarrassment of being eliminated tomorrow. A notification popped up. A text from her friend way back home. "Saw videos of your performance online. People are talking about it everywhere. So proud of you." Videos online? Lynn quickly searched and found several shaky cell phone recordings of her performance posted to social media. The comment section was filled with reactions. "Who is this girl? Where did she come from? Not technically perfect, but made me cry. This is why I love music. Raw emotion over robotic perfection." Lynn put her phone away, her mind racing. People had filmed her. Strangers were watching, commenting. Some even seemed moved by her playing. The garden door opened and Henry the volunteer poked his head out. "There you are. They're announcing the results in 20 minutes. You should come inside." Lin followed him back into the building, which now buzzed with tension. Contestants gathered near the main hall, some pacing nervously, others sitting in perfect stillness, eyes closed in meditation. Lin found a quiet corner and tried to calm her racing thoughts. Whatever happened next, she had made it this far. She had played her heart out on that stage. No one could take that away from her. "Ladies and gentlemen," a voice announced over the speakers, "please enter the main hall for the announcement of our first round results." The contestants filed in, taking seats in the front rows. The audience, mostly family members, teachers, and piano enthusiasts, filled the rest of the hall. The head judge, renowned pianist Thomas Reed, approached the microphone. His austere face gave nothing away. "Today we witnessed 36 performances of exceptional quality," he began. The level of technical proficiency was, as expected, outstanding. Lin's heart sank. Technical proficiency, exactly what she lacked. However, technique alone does not make a musician, Reed continued. As judges, we look for that indefinable quality that transforms notes on a page into a living, breathing story. He unfolded a paper. "The following 20 contestants will advance to tomorrow's second round." Lin closed her eyes as he began reading names. Zoe Winters was called first, to no one's surprise. More names followed. Each met with polite applause. Lin stopped listening after the 10th name. What had she been thinking? She didn't belong here. She should never have— Lin Chen. Her eyes snapped open. Had she imagined it? "Lin Chen," the judge repeated, looking around the hall. Scattered applause broke out, along with a few whispers. Lin raised her hand slightly, and Reed nodded before continuing with the list. She had made it. Somehow, against all odds, she had made it to the second round. As people began to file out, Lin remained seated, too stunned to move. "Congratulations," came a voice beside her. Lin turned to see an older man with silver hair and kind eyes. She recognized him immediately. Professor James Wilson, one of the competition judges. "Thank you," Lin managed to say. "Your performance was memorable," he said carefully. "May I ask where you studied?" "I didn't really," Lin admitted. "I mean, I had a few lessons when I was younger, but mostly I taught myself. YouTube tutorials, books from the library." Wilson's eyebrows rose slightly. "Remarkable. Your technique needs refinement, certainly, but your interpretation of Chopin was quite moving." He hesitated. "Tomorrow's piece is more technically demanding. Liszt's Hungarian Rhapsody No. 2. Lin's stomach dropped. She knew the piece. It was notoriously difficult, requiring skills she wasn't sure she possessed. Wilson seemed to read her thoughts. "My advice? Don't try to play like the others. They've been trained to perfection. You have something different to offer." He stood to leave, then added, "They're scoffing now, but keep playing your way. It might just be what this competition needs." As he walked away, Lin sat in the empty hall, his words ringing in her ears. Play her way. But what exactly was her way? That evening in her small hotel room, the cheapest she could find within walking distance of the hall, Lin sat cross-legged on the bed with her tablet, watching recordings of Liszt's Hungarian Rhapsody. Her fingers moved silently above the bedspread, mimicking the keystrokes, feeling the rhythm. She couldn't match the technical brilliance of the other contestants. But maybe she didn't have to. Maybe, just maybe, she could find her own path through the music, one that spoke from her heart rather than just her hands. Lin fell asleep with her tablet still playing, her dreams filled with music and a stage where, for once, no one scoffed when she sat down to play. Lin woke up with a jolt, momentarily confused by the unfamiliar hotel room. Sunlight streamed through the thin curtains. Her tablet lay beside her, its battery dead. With a rush of awareness, she remembered. Today was the second round. She checked her phone. 7:24 a.m., 6 hours until her performance time. Lin's stomach growled. She'd been too nervous to eat much yesterday, and now she was paying the price. After a quick shower, she dressed in her only other decent outfit, black pants and a simple blue blouse, and headed out to find breakfast. The small cafe across from her hotel was already bustling with morning customers. Lin found a quiet corner table and ordered coffee and a bagel. As she waited, she noticed a newspaper left on a nearby chair. The art section featured a small article about the competition. Among yesterday's standouts was wildcard entrant Lin Chen. whose unorthodox technique and emotional performance divided critics but captivated audiences. Lynn nearly spilled her coffee when she saw her name in print. The article was short but mentioned the unexpected audience response to her playing. At the bottom was a quote from Judge Thomas Reed. "Technical precision is essential, but music must ultimately speak to the heart." Was he talking about her? The door to the cafe opened and Lynn froze. Zoe Winters walked in with two other contestants, all dressed in designer clothes that made Lynn's simple outfit feel even more out of place. Thankfully, they didn't notice her in the corner as they took seats near the window. "I still can't believe she made it through," one of them said, loud enough for Lynn to hear. "My teacher would have kicked me out of the studio if I played like that." Zoe sipped her water elegantly. "Don't worry about her. The second round separates the serious musicians from the amateurs. Liszt requires technical skill she simply doesn't possess." Lynn stared down at her coffee, trying to make herself invisible. They were right. Hungarian Rhapsody No. 2 was famous for its technical challenges, the rapid octaves, the difficult jumps, the lightning-fast scales. How could she possibly compete? When the group finally left, Lynn paid for her barely touched breakfast and walked out into the morning air. She needed a piano. The competition hall wouldn't open to contestants until noon. With 4 hours to spare and nowhere to practice, Lynn felt panic rising in her chest. Then she remembered something. During yesterday's tour, one of the volunteers had mentioned a music store 3 blocks from the hall that sometimes let visiting pianists practice on their instruments. It was worth a try. The bell above the door jingled as Lynn entered Henderson's Music. The shop was narrow but deep, with instruments lining the walls and a few grand pianos displayed in the center of the main room. An older woman looked up from behind the counter. "Good morning. Can I help you?" "I'm participating in the competition at Parker Hall," Lynn explained. "I was wondering if—" "That is, I heard that sometimes you allow pianists to practice here?" The woman studied her for a moment. "You're one of the contestants?" Lynn nodded, suddenly self-conscious. Did she not look the part? "Interesting," the woman said. "We do have a practice room in the back. My son handles those arrangements, but he's not in yet." She glanced at the clock. "Tell you what, there's no one scheduled this morning. You can use the Yamaha in room 2 until 11. "Really, thank you so much," Lynn said, relief washing over her. The woman led her through the store to a small room with a baby grand piano. "It's not a Steinway like at the hall, but it's a fine instrument." Left alone, Lynn sat at the piano and placed her hands on the keys. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath. Then she began to play the opening of Liszt's Hungarian Rhapsody No. 2. The first section was slow, almost playful, and Lynn felt comfortable with it. But as she moved into the Friska, the fast section, her fingers stumbled over the difficult passages. She tried again, and again. Each time, her technical limitations became painfully obvious. After an hour of frustration, Lynn stopped, her hands aching. This wasn't working. She couldn't magically develop years of technical training overnight. Professor Wilson's words from yesterday echoed in her mind. "Don't try to play like the others." Lynn stared at the sheet music. What if she approached this differently? She couldn't match their technical perfection, but maybe she could find her own way through the piece. She began again, but this time, instead of trying to copy the recordings she'd studied, she listened to what the music was saying to her. Where the traditional interpretation called for showmanship, Lynn found moments of tenderness. Where others played for speed, she found meaning in the spaces between notes. By the time the woman knocked on the door to let her know it was 11 o'clock, Lynn had found something, not perfection, but a version of the piece that felt true to her. "Thank you again," Lynn said as she gathered her things. The woman nodded. "You play differently," she observed. "Not like the others who come in here." Lynn couldn't tell if this was a compliment or criticism. "I know my technique isn't perfect." "Technique," the woman said with a small smile. "My husband was a pianist, very technically skilled, but you know what? In 40 years of marriage, the times that moved me most were when he played simple songs at home, without worrying about being perfect." Lynn thought about this as she walked to Parker Hall. The building looked different in the morning light, less intimidating somehow. Several contestants were already gathered in the lobby, some practicing finger exercises, others in hushed conversations with their teachers. Lynn checked in with the volunteer at the desk. Not Henry today, but a young woman who barely looked at her as she handed over the schedule. Lynn would perform at 1:45 p.m., about midway through the lineup. As she turned to find a quiet place to wait, she nearly bumped into Professor Wilson. "Ah, Ms. Chen," he said with a nod. "Ready for today?" "I hope so," Lynn said honestly. "I've been practicing, but this piece is challenging." Wilson's eyes were kind but serious. "It's designed to be." Liszt was a showman. He wrote to impress, to dazzle. He paused. "But remember, even the most technically difficult music has a story to tell. Find the story and the notes will follow." With that cryptic advice, he continued on his way, leaving Lynn to ponder his words. The contestants' waiting area was tense with nervous energy. Lynn found a corner seat and tried to calm her mind, listening through earbuds to a recording of the piece one last time. Around her, other pianists went through their rituals, some stretching their fingers, others sitting with eyes closed in concentration. The morning passed in a blur. Lynn heard snippets of performances through the monitor, each one technically brilliant. Zoe's performance earned particularly enthusiastic applause. The bar was impossibly high. At 1:40, a stage manager approached her. "Lynn Chen, you're up next." The walk to the stage felt longer today. Lynn could feel the weight of expectations. The audience who had been moved by her yesterday, the critics who had dismissed her, the judges who had surprised everyone by advancing her to this round. Our next performer, playing Franz Liszt's Hungarian Rhapsody No. 2. Please welcome back Lynn Chen. The applause was different this time, more curious, more anticipatory. People sat forward in their seats. Lynn spotted Henry in the wings, giving her a thumbs up. As she adjusted the bench and placed her hands on the keys, Lynn noticed the silence in the hall. No scoffs today, but plenty of skepticism. Could the girl with the unorthodox technique handle one of the most technically demanding pieces in the repertoire? Lynn took a deep breath and began to play. The opening came easily, the familiar notes flowing from her fingers. She took the tempo slightly slower than traditional, finding a thoughtfulness in the last-hand section that felt natural to her. When she hit the first difficult passage, she didn't try to rush through it for effect. Instead, she leaned into it, letting the music breathe. As she transitioned into the frisca, Lynn felt her heart rate increase. This was where she had struggled most in practice. The fast, virtuosic passages required precision she wasn't sure she possessed. Lynn looked up briefly and caught sight of Zoe in the audience, arms crossed, a skeptical expression on her face. Next to her, the other contestants watched with similar doubt. Something shifted inside Lynn. Yes, she might miss notes. Yes, her technique wasn't perfect. But this was her moment, her chance to tell her story through Liszt's notes. She dove into the fast section with abandon, not holding back. When her fingers stumbled over a particularly difficult run, she didn't pause or apologize. She recovered and continued, pouring more emotion into the next phrase. Where others might have showcased technical brilliance, Lynn found emotional truth. The piece wasn't just about virtuosity. It was about passion, about spirit, about the full range of human experience. Lynn played from somewhere deep inside herself, a place no teacher had ever reached. As she approached the famous octave section, the part that had given her the most trouble, Lynn didn't shy away. She attacked it with all the force she could muster, her hands blurring across the keys. It wasn't flawless, but it was alive. The final chords resonated through the hall, powerful and defiant. Lynn sat still for a moment, aware of her rapid breathing, the sweat on her brow, the trembling in her hands. Then she became aware of something else. The silence. A different kind of silence than before. Not the silence of shock or confusion, but the silence of people collectively holding their breath. When the applause came, it erupted like a storm, sudden and overwhelming. People were standing. Someone shouted, "Bravo!" from the balcony. Lynn rose shakily and bowed. As she looked out at the audience, she saw different expressions now. Some still looked confused, even disapproving, but others, many others, had tears in their eyes. Whatever happened next, Lynn had played her truth. And for the first time in her life, that felt like enough. Lynn stumbled into the backstage area, her legs weak and her heart racing. She could still hear the applause behind her, like waves crashing against a shore. Had that really happened? Had she really just played Liszt's Hungarian Rhapsody in front of hundreds of people and received a standing ovation? Water? It was Henry, the volunteer, holding out a bottle with a grin. You might need this. Thank you, Lynn said, her voice barely above a whisper. Her hands were still trembling as she took the bottle. That was... Henry shook his head, seemingly at a loss for words. I don't even know how to describe it. Before Lynn could respond, the backstage door burst open and a small group of reporters rushed in, led by a woman with short red hair and sharp eyes. Lynn Chen? The woman called out. Diane Walker from Classical Music Today. Can we get a few words about your performance? Lynn froze. Reporters? Wanting to talk to her? How did you prepare for today's piece? Another asked. What conservatory did you attend? I didn't, Lynn began, but was cut off by more questions. Is it true you're self-taught? Who's your mentor? What's your technique called? The barrage of questions made Lynn's head spin. Henry stepped in front of her protectively. Ms. Chen is done for the day, he said firmly. Competition rules state no interviews until after the final round. Please respect that. The reporters looked disappointed but backed away, scribbling notes and whispering among themselves. Thank you, Lynn said to Henry when they were gone. I didn't know what to say to them. No need to thank me. Those vultures would have eaten you alive. He smiled kindly. You should know you've become quite the sensation. Videos of yesterday's performance have gone viral online. Piano Girl is trending. Lynn stared at him in disbelief. What, but why? Henry chuckled. Because people love an underdog story. The unknown girl with no formal training who shows up and plays with such raw emotion? It's the stuff of movies. Lynn didn't know how to process this information. She was just Lynn, the girl who played piano at a community center, whose parents worked long hours at their small restaurant, who had never imagined herself on a stage like this. The results will be announced at 6, Henry said. You should rest until then. Lynn nodded gratefully. She needed time to collect her thoughts. As she made her way toward the exit, planning to return to her hotel for a few hours, a voice stopped her. Ms. Chen. Lynn turned to see Professor Wilson approaching. His expression was unreadable. Professor? She greeted him nervously. That was... He paused, seeming to search for the right words. A most unusual interpretation of Liszt. Lynn's heart sank. I know it wasn't technically perfect. I tried my best, but... Technical perfection, Wilson interrupted, is overrated. Lynn blinked in surprise. Don't misunderstand me, he continued. Technique is important. Essential, even. But it is a means to an end, not the end itself. He studied her face. What you did out there today, you found the heart of the piece. Many pianists with far more training never managed to do that. Thank you, Lynn said, not knowing what else to say. Wilson nodded. Rest now. But know this. Whatever happens tonight, you've already accomplished something remarkable. He turned to leave, then added, And Ms. Chen? If you do advance, the final round piece is Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2. I suggest you start preparing. As he walked away, Lynn felt a mixture of hope and dread. Rachmaninoff? One of the most technically demanding composers, known for his complex harmonies and enormous handspans. How could she possibly? Lynn pushed the thought aside. One step at a time. She might not even make it to the final round. Back in her hotel room, Lynn collapsed onto the bed, physically and emotionally drained. She should sleep, but her mind was too active. She picked up her phone and, against her better judgment, searched for Diderot's Piano Girl. Thousands of results appeared. Videos of her performances. Articles with headlines like Unknown Pianist Takes Competition, By Storm and the Girl Who Plays from the Heart. Comments ranged from effusive praise to harsh criticism of her technique. One video had over 1 million views. The comment section was filled with debates. This is what real music is about. Not just playing notes, but feeling them. Are you kidding? She butchered Liszt. This is an insult to classical training. I cried when she played. I've never done that listening to classical music before. If this girl advances over properly trained pianists, it's a travesty. Lynn put her phone down, her head spinning. She had never meant to cause such controversy. She'd entered the competition on a whim, never expecting to get this far. A text message appeared on her screen from Wei. You're famous. The whole town is talking about you. Your parents are so proud. Lynn smiled at the thought of her parents. Her father, who knew nothing about classical music, but had always encouraged her playing. Her mother, who had worked extra shifts to pay for her few childhood lessons. What would they think if they could see her now? She must have dozed off because the next thing she knew her phone alarm was beeping. 5:30 p.m. 30 minutes until the results. Lynn splashed cold water on her face and headed back to the hall, her stomach in knots. The atmosphere at Parker Hall was electric. A much larger crowd had gathered than the day before, and Lynn noticed camera crews setting up in the corners. Word had spread about the competition's unexpected sensation. Backstage, the remaining contestants huddled in small groups. Zoe sat with her friends, throwing occasional glances in Lynn's direction. To Lynn's surprise, one of the younger pianists, a boy who couldn't be more than 16, approached her. "Your list was amazing," he said shyly. "I've been playing since I was 4, and my teacher always says I'm too mechanical. After watching you, I think I understand what she means." Before Lynn could respond, the lights dimmed, signaling it was time for the announcement. The contestants filed into the hall, taking their places in the reserved front rows. Thomas Reed, the head judge, approached the microphone. The hall fell silent. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "today we witnessed 20 remarkable performances of Liszt's Hungarian Rhapsody No. 2. Each pianist brought their unique perspective to this challenging work." He cleared his throat. As judges, our task was to evaluate these performances based on technical skill, interpretation, and artistic expression. After much deliberation, we have selected our 10 finalists. Lynn held her breath as Reed unfolded a paper. "In alphabetical order," he announced. "Our finalists are..." The first few names were unsurprising, all well-known competition circuit regulars, including Zoe Winters. Lynn tried to prepare herself for disappointment. She had come further than she'd ever imagined possible. That would have to be enough. "Lynn Chen," Reed called out. A murmur rippled through the audience. Lynn sat frozen, unable to believe her ears. Beside her, the teenage boy who had spoken to her earlier squeezed her arm in congratulation. Reed continued reading names, but Lynn barely heard them. She had made it to the finals. Against all odds, she would play Rachmaninoff with a full orchestra in 2 days' time. As the announcement concluded, the hall erupted in applause. People began to stand and mill about. Lynn felt dazed, still trying to process what had just happened. "Congratulations," came a cold voice beside her. Lynn looked up to see Zoe standing there, her expression tight. "You've certainly captured the audience's imagination." "Thank you," Lynn said carefully. "Congratulations to you too." "Let me give you some friendly advice," Zoe said, leaning closer. "Rachmaninoff isn't Chopin or Liszt. You can't fake your way through it with emotion. It will expose every weakness in your playing." She straightened up. "The finals separate the professionals from the amateurs. Always have." She walked away, leaving Lynn with a sick feeling in her stomach. Was Zoe right? Had Lynn's journey come as far as it could go? As the crowd thinned, Vivian Park, the competition director, approached Lynn. "Ms. Chen," she said briskly, "congratulations. Your presence in the finals has generated considerable interest in our competition. We've had 3 major television networks request permission to broadcast the final round." Lynn stared at her, speechless. "However," Ms. Park continued, "there are logistical matters to discuss. The Rachmaninoff concerto requires rehearsal time with the orchestra. All finalists will have 1 hour tomorrow. Your slot is at 2 p.m. She hesitated. "Have you ever played with an orchestra before?" Lynn shook her head. Ms. Park sighed. "I suspected as much. The conductor, Maestro Rivera, has agreed to give you a brief orientation before your rehearsal." She checked her watch. "I suggest you use every minute between now and then to prepare. This is unprecedented." As Ms. Park walked away, Lynn felt the full weight of what lay ahead. Playing solo was one thing. Playing with a 60-piece orchestra was another entirely. And Rachmaninoff's second piano concerto was legendary for its difficulty. Lynn gathered her things and headed for the exit, her mind racing. She would need to find somewhere to practice tonight, somewhere to study the score, somehow to prepare herself for a challenge far beyond anything she had faced before. Outside the hall, a small group of admirers had gathered. To Lynn's surprise, they called out her name when they saw her. "Lynn, can we get a picture? We love your playing. You're an inspiration." Lynn smiled awkwardly and allowed a few photos before politely excusing herself. As she walked away, she heard one woman say to another, "She plays like she's telling the story of her life." Maybe that was it, Lynn thought. That was all she had ever done. Tell her story through the piano. Not with perfect technique or years of training, but with honesty and heart. The orchestra rehearsal room was larger than Lynn's entire apartment back home. Rows of empty chairs and music stands waited for their musicians. And in the center of the room stood a magnificent grand piano, its lid fully open. Lynn clutched her well-worn copy of Rachmaninoff's Second Piano Concerto, purchased hastily the previous evening from Henderson's music. She had stayed up most of the night studying it, her eyes burning with fatigue as she tried to commit as much as possible to memory. Ms. Chen, a man with salt and pepper hair, approached, his hand extended. "I'm Maestro Rivera. We don't have much time before the orchestra arrives, so let's get started." Lynn shook his hand nervously. "Thank you for meeting me early. That is, I haven't played with an orchestra before." The conductor's eyebrows rose slightly, but he didn't seem surprised. "So I've been told. Don't worry. My job is to help you shine." He gestured toward the piano. "Show me what you've prepared." Lynn sat at the bench, adjusting it to her height. She placed her fingers on the keys, took a deep breath, and began playing the opening of the concerto, those famous, heavy chords that set the tone for the entire piece. After a few measures, Rivera held up his hand. "Stop, please." Lynn's heart sank. "I'm sorry, I know it's fine," he said, his tone kind but direct. "But you're playing as if you're alone. In a concerto, you're having a conversation with 60 other musicians. You need to leave space for them to speak." He moved to the piano, standing beside her. "Try again. This time imagine you're telling a story, but not alone. You're part of a community of storytellers." Lynn nodded and began again, trying to visualize the orchestra around her, the violins taking up the melody, the cellos providing warmth, the woodwinds adding color. Rivera nodded encouragingly. "Better. Now let me explain how this works. My hands will guide everyone, including you. When I look at you and give this cue," he demonstrated a specific gesture. "That's your signal to play. When I do this," another motion, "I'm asking you to hold back and let the orchestra speak. For the next 20 minutes, he walked Lynn through the basics of playing with an orchestra, explaining tempos, cues, and the subtle dance between soloist and ensemble. Lynn absorbed everything like a sponge, asking questions when she didn't understand. "You're a quick study," Rivera said with appreciation. "Now let's see how you do with the actual orchestra." As if on cue, the door opened and musicians began filing in. Violinists, cellists, flutists, all carrying their instruments and chatting quietly among themselves. Many cast curious glances at Lynn, no doubt having heard about the competition's surprising finalist. Lynn's stomach tightened with anxiety. These were world-class musicians, professionals who had devoted their lives to their craft. How could she possibly hold her own among them? As the orchestra settled into their seats, Rivera addressed them. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Lynn Chen, one of our competition finalists. She'll be performing Rachmaninoff's Second with us tomorrow. Let's give her a solid rehearsal." He turned to Lynn. "We'll start from the beginning and see how far we get in our hour. Don't worry about mistakes. That's what rehearsals are for. Just focus on the music." He raised his baton and the orchestra fell silent. Lynn positioned her hands over the keys, her heart pounding so loudly she was sure everyone could hear it. Rivera gave her the cue, and Lynn began to play. The opening chords resonated through the room, dark and powerful. Then the orchestra joined in, and Lynn nearly lost her place as the sound enveloped her. So much richer, so much more overwhelming than she had imagined. "Stay with me," Rivera called out, his baton never stopping. "Feel the pulse." Lynn struggled to find her footing in this new musical landscape. She missed entrances, played too loudly in some passages, too softly in others. Halfway through the first movement, Rivera stopped the orchestra. "Let's try again," he said patiently. "Ms. Chen, remember what we discussed about conversation. You're not competing with the orchestra. You're dancing with it." They started again. This time, Lynn tried to listen more, to feel the give and take between her piano and the other instruments. It was still rough, but slightly better. By the third attempt, Lynn was beginning to understand. This wasn't just about playing the notes on the page. It was about being part of something larger than herself, about finding her voice within a community of voices. The hour passed quickly. Too quickly, They only made it through the first movement and part of the second before Rivera checked his watch and sighed. "That's all the time we have," he announced. "Ms. Chen, you've made good progress for someone new to this. Practice with the recording tonight and remember what we worked on." As the musicians packed up their instruments, the concertmaster, a woman with striking gray eyes, approached Lin. "You have something special," she said quietly. "It's not perfect, not by any means, but there's a truth in your playing that's rare." She smiled. "We'll support you tomorrow. Just trust us and trust yourself." Lin thanked her, touched by the unexpected kindness. Back in her hotel room, Lin practiced until her fingers ached, playing along with recordings, trying to memorize as much as possible. But the more she played, the more she realized the enormity of the challenge ahead. Rachmaninoff had written this concerto for virtuosos with years of training and experience. Lin had neither. Around midnight, her phone rang. It was her mother. "Lin, are you still awake?" "Mom," Lin said, emotion suddenly welling up in her throat. "I'm so glad you called." "We saw you on the internet," her mother said, her voice filled with pride. "Your father cried." "He never cries." Lin smiled through her own tears. "I miss you both. We miss you too. We wanted to come see you play, but the restaurant—" "I know, Mom, it's okay." "Are you nervous about tomorrow?" Lin hesitated. "Yes, it's a very hard piece. Much harder than anything I've played before. I don't know if I can do it." Her mother was quiet for a moment. "Do you remember when you were 12 and you wanted to play in the school talent show?" "I remember," Lin said softly. "You practiced that piece for weeks. Then the night before, you told me you couldn't do it. You were too scared. And you said, I said being scared means you care. And then what happened?" Lin smiled at the memory. "I played. I made mistakes, but people still clapped." "They clapped because you played from here," her mother said, and Lin knew she was pointing to her heart. "Play from your heart tomorrow, Lin, that's all anyone can ask." After they hung up, Lin felt calmer. Her mother was right. All she could do was play her truth, as she had from the beginning. The morning of the finals dawned bright and clear. Lin arrived at the hall early, hoping for a few minutes alone at the piano before the chaos began. To her surprise, Professor Wilson was there, sitting in the empty auditorium. "Professor?" She greeted him. "You're here early." "As are you," he replied. "Nervous?" "Terrified," Lin admitted. Wilson nodded. "Good. The day you stop being nervous is the day you stop caring." He studied her for a moment. "You've come a long way in a short time, Ms. Chen. Not far enough, I'm afraid. Rachmaninoff is—" She trailed off. "Difficult." "Yes, but you've already proven you can move an audience. That's a gift many technically perfect pianists never develop." He stood to leave. "I look forward to your performance." The hours before the final round passed in a blur. The hall filled to capacity with television cameras positioned discreetly throughout. Lin caught a glimpse of the crowd from backstage. Easily 1,000 people, many drawn by the story of the unknown pianist who had taken the competition by storm. Zoe performed first, her rendition of the Rachmaninoff technically flawless. The audience responded with enthusiastic applause. 2 more finalists followed, each bringing their own interpretation to the piece. Then it was Lin's turn. "Our next finalist," the announcer's voice echoed through the hall, "playing Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2 in C minor. Please welcome Lin Chen." The applause was deafening as Lin walked onto the stage. She could feel the weight of expectations, from those who believed in her, from those who thought she didn't belong, from those who simply wanted to witness whatever happened next. Lin took her seat at the piano and adjusted the bench. She looked up at Maestro Rivera, who gave her a reassuring nod. Then, in the moment before the music began, Lin closed her eyes and thought of her journey, from the community center piano to this grand stage. She thought of all the people who had scoffed, all those who had believed, all those who had helped her along the way. Rivera raised his baton. Lin placed her hands on the keys, and they began. The familiar chords resonated through the hall, but this time Lin wasn't alone. The orchestra surrounded her with sound, lifting her playing to heights she had never reached before. Lin felt something she had never experienced, the joy of making music not as an individual, but as part of something greater. When the technical challenges came, Lin didn't shy away. She attacked them with everything she had, not always perfectly, but always honestly. And when the lyrical second movement arrived, Lynn poured her whole heart into it, her struggles, her fears, her dreams, her gratitude. The audience sat spellbound. Even those who had come expecting technical brilliance found themselves moved by the raw emotion of Lynn's playing. She wasn't just performing Rachmaninoff. She was telling her story through his notes. As the final movement built toward its thunderous conclusion, Lynn felt herself carried along on a wave of sound and feeling. Her fingers flew across the keys, finding notes she hadn't known she could play. The orchestra matched her intensity, conductor and soloist and musicians breathing as one. The final chords rang out, powerful and triumphant. Lynn's hands lifted from the keys, trembling with exertion and emotion.